I'm Mason Harper, 29, and I still remember the itch in my skin when Mom handed out those little gift boxes around our long oak table. We were at Grandma's house in Portland for Thanksgiving. My cousins and aunts buzzed around the kitchen. My Uncle Wayne was already bossing the mashed potatoes. Chloe and Emma, my younger sisters, were elbow deep in wrapping paper. I sat at the end next to Dad trying to look busy. Mom passed a box to Chloe, then one to Emma, then to my cousin Zoe, who hadn't even come last year. She unwrapped a necklace with her name on it. Everyone oohed. I waited and waited. The boxes stopped coming. I cleared my throat. "Is there one for me?" She glanced at me like I'd asked for too much gravy. "Oh, please," she said. "Be grateful we even let you sit here." Uncle Wayne snorted. "Be glad we still remember your name." They laughed. Not a single head turned to check if I was actually there. I stared at my plate. My chest felt hollow. I managed good to know. Then I crammed in the last bite of turkey and stood up. In the hallway, I bumped into Emma. She didn't look up, just scrolled her phone. Chloe peeked out from behind a curtain and smirked. Dad was still laughing from the kitchen. Mom shut the door before I could say anything else. I slipped outside to the cold air. My coat felt too thin. The street lamps glowed like distant beacons. I leaned against the brick wall and closed my eyes. Why did it still hurt so much? 2 years ago, I left home for Seattle. I needed space and a life that wasn't scripted by their judgments. I paid my own rent, built my own career, and never asked for help. Yet here I was back in their world feeling smaller than ever. When I finally got my bearings, I walked back in, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the car. I didn't say goodbye, I just drove 3 hours to my empty apartment, reheating ramen in the dark. Because that night, as much as I tried to pretend it was normal, I realized I was done pretending. That morning, I woke up with the sunrise slanting through my blinds like a silent accusation. I'd slept on the couch in my jeans and hoodie, half-dressed, and still feeling the chill from that hoodie grab in the hallway. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant rumble of traffic downtown. I sat up, rubbed the bruise gathering on my shin where I'd stubbed my toe chasing my jacket last night, and thought of Mom's empty shrug when I asked for a gift at Thanksgiving. Dad's laughter echoed through my mind, brittle and careless like broken glass. I rose, grabbed my phone. No family messages, just a string of unread texts from Andre checking in, and started the coffee maker. Steam coiled around my face as I looked at my reflection in the window, that tired guy I barely recognized, and felt something shift. I wasn't going back. I took a long sip of bitter coffee and realized I needed more than caffeine. I needed a plan. Last night was a live grenade and the pieces were still hot. By the time the cup drained, I'd decided to call Sarah Noyen, my old law school classmate, who specialized in family disputes and corporate messes. My thumb hovered over her number, heart pounding. If I blew this whistle, there'd be no taking it back. By 9 o'clock, I was on the northbound train, a half-empty car with newspapers scattered like confetti after a parade by. I clutched the thermos as if it were my lifeline and watched my reflection blur against graffiti-streaked windows. My phone buzzed with an email from Sarah. Urgent, call me ASAP. Below us, the rails throbbed a mechanical heartbeat reminding me time marched on whether I wanted it to or not. Above us, skyscrapers cut through the morning haze, monuments to ambition, privilege, and ceilings I'd already shattered. I thought of Mom's gift boxes, hollow shells of sentiment, and of how I'd become the family's ghost until I stopped funding their phone plans and insurance. I clicked call and heard Sarah's sharp greeting. "Mason, I need you to see some documents tonight. Your parents' company books are off by 6 figures and there's a Nevada LLC you never heard of." My chest tightened. Was I propping up an embezzlement scheme or covering for something darker? Sarah's next words, hushed and urgent, cut through the rumble. "Trust no one." Then she hung up, leaving me staring at the tracks and wondering how deep the rabbit hole went. I jumped off at my downtown stop and let the drizzle wash over me like a baptism. I walked without checking my phone, letting the rhythm of my boots on wet pavement ground me. Rounding the corner, the old high school loomed where I first learned some kids get trophies for breathing. Beneath the cracked bronze plaque reading "Strength and Unity," I paused. Unity, funny word when your own bloodline treats you like an outsider. Across the street, a mural of a phoenix rising from ash flared in bright spray paint colors, destruction and rebirth entwined in one image, exactly what I needed. I snapped a photo, thinking how I'd use that symbol when I finally told my story, and slipped my phone into my pocket. As I approached a corner cafe to make some phone calls, a drenched figure stepped into view. Emma, my youngest sister, hair plastered to her face, arms crossed like armor. She said nothing, just met my eyes with a mix of defiance and fear. My heart jolted. She was the one who'd quietly wished me well when I moved away, and now she was here soaked and silent. A living question mark demanding my next move. I led her inside, the bell chiming like an alarm. Steam rose from 2 lattes on the table. We squeezed ourselves into warmth, fighting the cold drizzle left behind. I asked why she'd come. She stared at the latte foam and finally sighed, tracing lazy circles with her finger. "You're going to regret stirring that nest," she said, voice low but urgent. I leaned forward, feeling scars from last night itch to open up. "I need to," I replied. "They've been treating me like I don't exist." She looked up, eyes fierce. "Mom's broken, Grandma's crying that you've gone too far." I shook my head. "They're not sad, they're angry." Emma's brow furrowed deeper than any storm cloud. "They're calling you ungrateful, crazy," she whispered. My pulse thundered. "That's why I dug deeper," I said. I told her about the shell company, the missing funds, the phone plans I'd paid for. Emma's jaw clenched. If this comes out, their world collapses. I swallowed, imagining every family name splashed across headlines. "Maybe it needs to," she said softly. We sat in silence as cafe chatter fell away, the rain pattering against the window like a countdown to impact. I realized I wasn't alone. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Back home, I cleared the kitchen table and spread out every document, Venmo receipts, group chat screenshots, bank statements, showing me as the invisible ATM. The numbers glared at me like witnesses. I counted the months I'd covered Dad's cell bill, the Christmas gifts I'd shouldered, the emergency funds for Grandma's roof repair, threads in a tapestry of silent leverage I'd unwittingly woven. On the wall, a framed photo showed me with Mom at a 4th of July parade, sunburnt and grinning. That kid still believed in unconditional love. Now staring at the documents, it felt like betrayal. I opened a blank doc and started typing, not a rant, but a precise timeline. Thanksgiving gift snub, phone plan payments, insurance drafts, LLC formations, ghost employers, hidden bank accounts. I crafted every sentence to land like a hammer. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, urgent and relentless, as if echoing my own heartbeat. Past midnight, I hit save draft and felt the weight of possibility. My phone buzzed Sarah's message, "Be ready tomorrow." I stared at tomorrow like it was a fuse lit. I exhaled, clenched my fist, and clicked publish. The next morning, my phone felt like a battlefield, emails, DMs, voicemails, all blinking red with alarm and fury. My post had gone viral in our circle, neighbors, old high school friends, even a local blogger jumped on it. Comments ranged from "finally someone called them out" to "I demand proof." Simultaneously, the family group chat exploded. Mom's name in all caps. "How dare you?" Dad's voice notes, "You've destroyed our legacy." Wayne texted, "You're so ungrateful." Chloe sent a tear emoji apology. Emma sent a clenched fist emoji, and "I've got your back." Amid the chaos, Grandma whispered through a private message, "Please come home." My chest tightened. I glanced at the phoenix on my lock screen and realized I couldn't go back into ashes. I boxed up my leftover Christmas decor, no more forced celebrations in a house that never felt like home. In the group chat, I typed, "I've shown you the books. If you want to talk, you know where to find me." Then I pressed send, and for the first time in years, I exhaled. The notifications stopped, silence heavy as a blanket. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. I sat in the dawn of a new chapter. I woke before dawn to the soft glow of my phone lighting up the corner of the room. Overnight, my post had spread beyond the family chat. Neighbors, old classmates, even a couple of local reporters had reached out. My chest felt tight like a fist clenched around my ribs, but I sat up and reached for the thermos, letting the lukewarm coffee wash away the last traces of sleep. The apartment was silent except for the hum of distant traffic. And in that stillness, I realized I wasn't the scared kid who'd flinched at Mom's jokes anymore. I was someone who'd thrown a stack of truths across the table and watched the pieces scatter. My reflection in the window looked back, eyes fierce with purpose. In the kitchen, I found a note from Emma, just her sharp handwriting on plain paper. "Meet me at the mural." 8 a.m. Beneath her words, she had drawn a small phoenix wings half unfurled. That drawing was a promise she still believed in me, and maybe it was time I believed in myself too. I grabbed my coat and slipped outside into the pre-sunrise chill, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and exhilaration that set every nerve alight. Because when I reached the corner where the mural arced across the brick wall in blazing reds and golds, I discovered Emma already there, perched on a low ledge, arms wrapped around her knees like she was bracing herself against the wind, silent, determined, and waiting. She didn't speak until I stepped under the phoenix's gaze and felt the paint's warmth radiating through the cold air. Then she looked up, eyes glassy with urgency. "They're trying to gaslight us," she said, voice low. "Mom texted me that if I don't delete your post, she'll disown me. And Chloe's been crying because people are calling her traitor." Her words hit like hail against my skin. I crouched beside her, heart hammering. "They'll do anything to stay in control," I murmured. "But we're not kids anymore." Emma nodded, breath fogging in the morning air. We stood in silence as commuter cars rolled by the mural's phoenix, watching us like a sentinel. My mind raced. I'd exposed shell companies missing funds and fraudulent LLCs hidden in their corporate filings. If this went public, it wouldn't just fracture our family. It could ruin the business my parents spent 20 years building. That risk felt like standing on a rickety bridge over dark waters, but I'd crossed half the span already. Emma slipped me an envelope. "Sarah said you'd need this," she whispered. Inside were folders stamped attorney-client privilege filled with affidavits from former employees who'd signed non-disclosure agreements years ago. My breath caught. It wasn't just numbers on a page, it was proof that the money I'd unknowingly funneled was concealing something far uglier than petty family neglect. I looked back at the mural ashes to flame and realized that if I walked away now, I'd be dying to the thing I'd fought so hard to leave behind. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and spread the documents across the coffee table. Hundreds of pages, bank statements, lease agreements, emails redacted to hide, key phrases, witness testimonies too detailed to be coincidence. My hands trembled as I traced the lines that tied my parents to offshore accounts nobody had told me about. The weight of their secrets pressed down like an avalanche, ready to bury me if I stumbled. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring, voice clipped. "They're moving fast," she said. "The CFO resigned this morning and the board is meeting at noon. We need to file injunction papers before they drag this into arbitration and bury it under legal fees." My pulse thundered. Every second I delayed was another chance for them to cover their tracks or leverage public sympathy by spinning me as the ungrateful son. I drew a shaky breath and told her I was ready. She gave me precise instructions: draft the complaint, gather my declarations, and meet her at her office before 11. I hung up and felt an electric crackle in my veins, like I'd flipped a switch, turning me from family casualty to full-blown insurgent in a war nobody saw coming. But as I typed the first lines of my affidavit, "I, Mason Harper, declare under penalty of perjury," I hesitated. Even if I won, what would I have left of the people who raised me? Would the money I exposed be worth the siblings I might lose forever? And in that pause hung the shape of my next move, sharp and cold as a blade. At Sarah's sleek downtown office, a glass tower that caught the glare of midday sun, I handed over my laptop. The view from her corner suite looked out over the river where barges drifted like silent witnesses. Her paralegal, a studious guy named Omar, took notes as Sarah outlined the legal battlefield injunction to freeze assets, criminal referral for fraud, civil suit for emotional distress. They spoke in measured tones, but my blood burned with the knowledge that every clause and subsection was a stepping stone toward reclaiming the life they'd tried to own. Omar slid a mug of coffee across the table. I cradled it, savoring the warmth. Sarah said, "Once we file, it'll hit the media. Prepare for backlash." I nodded, swallowing hard. I expect a counterattack. She gave me a grim smile. "They'll accuse you of betrayal, greed, even slander, but you've got more than enough evidence." Still, I wondered how long I could stand the spotlight. I thought of Grandma's trembling voicemail, how she'd begged me to come home for Christmas. Would I return as the triumphant hero or the prodigal son turned pariah? My reflection in the window showed a man balanced on a razor's edge between justice and remorse. And when Sarah rang her assistant to schedule the filing, my heart echoed the assistant's footsteps receding down the hall, leaving me alone with a decision that would define every path from here on. By evening, news outlets had sniffed out the basics. Harper family conflict erupts in legal showdown, Thanksgiving, gift, snub sparks, fraud allegations, and the usual snarky headlines about privileged kid throws parents under the bus. Social media churned with hot takes, some praising me as a whistleblower, others scolding me as an ungrateful son. My DMs filled with supportive messages from friends, but also venomous threats from strangers who felt entitled to judge a private family drama. I watched it unfold over takeout noodles in my living room, the blue light of the TV reflecting off the phoenix painting I'd hung above the couch. That mural used to remind me that destruction could lead to rebirth, but now it glowed like a warning. I realized the real fight wasn't just in the courtrooms or in the papers lining my walls. It was inside me, between the urge to prove them wrong and the longing for a family that felt like home. I opened my journal handwriting jagged from adrenaline and wrote, "I will not let them define me." The words felt like armor snapping into place around my heart. Outside, the street lamp flickered and I knew tomorrow would bring fresh chaos, but for the first time I welcomed it because the darkness was where I'd found my own light. That night, sleep eluded me. I paced the apartment, tracing the outline of that phoenix on the wall with my eyes, fingers itching to reach out and touch its painted feathers. Every time I paused, I saw Mom's face, her eyes narrowing when she'd realized the magnitude of my post, and then the betrayal flashing across them as she scavenged for ways to discredit me. I felt a surge of anger so hot it burned through my veins. But beneath it lay something stronger, the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Emma had risked everything by standing with me in the dawn chill. Sarah and Omar had mobilized a legal hammer on my behalf. Little by little, strangers were rallying to my cause because they saw the flicker of truth in my fight. I opened my laptop and drafted messages to Chloe and to Grandma, letting them know I loved them, and that I wished they could see me not as a threat, but as a son trying to reclaim dignity. I didn't send those messages yet. They hovered in my outbox like fragile bridges over chasms of resentment. Instead, I closed the laptop, lay down, and stared at the ceiling until the graying edges of dawn seeped through the blinds. In those quiet hours before the world roared awake, I made a promise to myself: no matter what twists the next day brought, no matter how many allies turned to foes or how many doors slammed in my face, I would hold firm. The Phoenix taught me that from the ashes comes rebirth, and I was ready to rise again, even if it meant burning down every lie to get there. Morning arrived with a knock at my door that rattled the frame. I opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope stamped "Confidential," and inside were sealed documents from my parents' attorney, formal notice of counterclaims accusing me of defamation and breach of fiduciary duty. They wanted to freeze my bank account, demand an apology, and force me into mediation under penalty of contempt. It felt like a slap across my face. My breath caught as I realized they weren't playing to save face, they were playing for blood. The phoenix on the wall seemed to flame brighter, as if daring me to fan the embers. I folded the papers, slid them into my backpack, and locked the door. Outside, traffic hummed like an indifferent audience, and I stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling the weight of choice to retreat into fear and let them crush me, or to stand in the middle of that intersection and dare the world to stop me. My phone buzzed Emma's name on the screen. I answered without hesitation, voice steady. "They countered," I said. She took a breath. "Then we escalate." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, as I pocketed my phone and turned toward the rising sun. I felt something unfurl inside me, a fierce, unshakable certainty that whatever came next, I would face it head-on. And in that moment, I knew the real transformation had begun. I woke to the ping of my phone before the sun even cleared the horizon, dozens of unread messages blinking like impatient eyes. My breath caught when I saw an alert from the court. Our injunction had been fast-tracked, a preliminary hearing set for next week. The weight in my chest shifted, pride, fear, exhilaration tangled together. I poured coffee and stood by the window watching fog drift off the river, thinking how the same mist that hides the city's skyline also veils the truths we refuse to face. I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I was no longer the family's invisible cashier or punchline, but their greatest threat. As dawn spilled gold across the bulletin boards, plastered with my parents' glossy Harper & Sons logos, I felt something ignite in my gut. It wasn't just about money or pride anymore. It was about demanding integrity where there'd only been hypocrisy. I snapped a picture of the corporate banner and sent it to Sarah with the words, "Let's go to war," knowing that every second I delayed, they'd be plotting their next move, and I didn't have the luxury of waiting. That afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the Phoenix mural, the wall still streaked with rainwater from yesterday's drizzle. A dozen reporters milled around cameras, swiveling like vultures, microphones thrust toward me. My heart pounded as I stepped into the frame, inhaled deeply, and let my voice carry. This isn't about tearing down a family, it's about rebuilding trust on foundations of truth. Behind me, the phoenix's flaming wings seemed to spread wider, as if affirming my words. I spoke of shell companies' offshore accounts, the phone bills I'd been duped into covering, and the emotional toll of being treated like collateral damage. Questions fired at me, but I answered each with calm precision, refusing to be rattled. When a reporter asked if I regretted exposing my parents, I paused, looking up at those painted flames, and said, "Regret is for people who still believe lies can hold a family together." The microphones fell silent for a moment, and in that hush I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was challenging a social contract that excuses nepotism under the guise of loyalty, and I wouldn't apologize for demanding better. Later that evening, I met with Jonah Patel, the former CFO who'd quietly resigned after I filed my suit. We sat in a dimly lit coffee shop downtown, the hum of espresso machines underscoring our hushed conversation. Jonah slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were bank records showing transfers to an LLC in Nevada funds, earmarked for property investment that vanished into thin air. Then he dropped the twist I just found emails, he said, voice low, showing my own father was a silent partner in that shell company. Your parents used you as an unwitting front for generations of money laundering. My breath hitched. This went deeper than I thought. My fight was unmasking not only my parents' greed, but a legacy of corruption that rippled through every boardroom handshake and holiday dinner. My hands trembled as I realized I'd become the focal point in a story that blended family betrayal with institutional rot. I looked at the neon cafe sign flickering above Jonah's head. All things honest. The irony stung, and I knew then that my next move had to be surgical, not just loud. A legal strike that laid bare not only their ledger, but the moral decay hidden behind closed doors. Back in my apartment, I spread out the new evidence alongside my own receipts and court filings. The table groaned under the weight of printed emails, bank statements, and affidavits. Each document felt like a confession, each number a nail in the coffin of their empire. I updated my chronology, weaving in Jonah's revelations, a pattern of hidden accounts, offshore trusts, and misappropriated funds dating back decades. Everything pointed to a network that thrived on secrecy and social privilege, shielding itself by cloaking greed and family loyalty. As I worked, the phoenix painting on my wall caught the late-night lamplight, its wings now blazing with urgency. I realized this wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a statement about how power protects itself with myths of unity and obligation. When I finally hit upload on the supplemental evidence to the court portal, I felt my heart pound like a gavel striking truth. I closed my eyes, whispered, "Here's the real story," and wondered if the shockwaves would destroy more than just their balance sheets. The morning of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I stood in a crowded hallway outside the courtroom, tailored in a charcoal suit that felt stiff and alien. Reporters lined the windows. Family members trickled in, faces pale and strained. I caught Grandma's eye from across the lobby, her expression a mixture of sorrow and pride, and my chest tightened. This was about more than money now. It was about whether the system protects the guilty or elevates the whistleblower. When my turn came, I walked up to the bench, every step echoing like a drumbeat of inevitability. I handed the judge the bundle of exhibits, met my parents' lawyer's gaze, and said, "Your Honor, we ask for a temporary restraining order on all family assets and immediate appointment of an independent auditor." The opposing counsel sputtered, calling it a reckless overreach. I felt my pulse surge. "Your Honor," I pressed on. "Reckless is letting a family business prosper on a foundation of lies and embezzlement." In the hush that followed, I realized that whether the judge ruled for or against me, the truth was out, and it burned with the purity of a spark ready to become an inferno. That evening, with the hearing adjourned until next week, I found myself on my rooftop terrace, the city lights flickering below like stars fallen to earth. The air carried the scent of rain and asphalt, grounding me. I thought of the Phoenix mural, of Emma's unwavering support, of Jonah's courage to speak up. I thought of every dollar I'd spent on my family's hidden debts, every gift that came wrapped in contempt. The legal counterclaims hung over me like storm clouds, threatening to drown me in costs and countersuits. But beneath that fear, there was a steady flame of conviction. I poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the glow of neon bar signs across the street. I raised it to the night sky and whispered, "To truth, no matter the cost." As the glass touched my lips, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "I saw you today. Proud of you." My heart caught in my throat. If even one piece of this fight rebuilt the bridge to my sister, maybe it was worth every risk. The city breathed around me, alive with possibilities, and I realized the next chapter was already writing itself, and I was determined to see the phoenix rise no matter how many ashes lay at my feet. I woke the morning after the hearing with my suit still hanging in the bathroom, stiff as armor, and tainted by the adrenaline of the day before. The judge had granted a preliminary injunction, freezing key family assets, and for a moment I felt lighter than air, like a bird freed from a cage. It never chose, but that elation dissolved as soon as I stared at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, tracing the dark circles under my eyes and the crease between my eyebrows. The powers that be had already begun their counterstrike. Anonymous op-eds painting me as a spoiled son out to destroy his parents, late-night talk shows ridiculing my family vendetta, and a legal notice demanding I disclose every private correspondence I'd ever sent. My phone vibrated non-stop with reporters clamoring for sound bites. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, the steam threading through my senses, and realized that winning this injunction was only the beginning. It had lit a flare that would draw every predator in sight. So I did the only thing that made sense. I drafted a press release of my own one that named names, cited documents, and called out the toxic culture of nepotism and secrecy that cloaked so many family-run enterprises. I hit send with a trembling finger, knowing full well that this public reveal would risk turning my parents' boardroom war into a personal bloodbath. My heart thundered as I watched the release distribute across newswires. Every headline would now bear my face and my truth. But if I didn't shine a light on their darkest corners, I'd have no hope of reclaiming the life I'd fought so hard to build. No hope but to watch their empire swallow me whole piece by piece. By noon, I found myself at a crowded downtown conference room rented for what they'd billed as a community discussion. Friends, former colleagues, random strangers who'd seen my story on social feeds, they filled folding chairs while cameras rolled. I cleared my throat, scanned the audience, and then laid out the next bombshell. Not only had I uncovered shell companies tied to Nevada real estate deals, but I'd also obtained emails showing that my grandparents' pillars of local charity drives and church boards had quietly signed off on siphoning funds toward offshore accounts. The room went silent, the air thick with disbelief. Fingers clicked record buttons, eyebrows shot skyward. I watched their faces, hoping to catch a flicker of understanding, but instead saw a reflection of the social hypocrisy I'd spent my life chafing against in this town. Good works on Main Street often hid sins under polished mahogany in back offices. As I clicked through slides, each revelation felt like a hammer-striking, glass-shattering family myths and colonial-era beliefs that bloodline equals virtue. And when I reached the final slide, an image of the Phoenix mural that had become my emblem, I saw shock in every eye, even among my supporters. Because I'd just crossed into territory too explosive for polite conversation, and everyone sensed the world had tilted off its axis. I stepped away from the podium, my pulse drumming in my ears, knowing that once the doors opened, nobody would walk through them unchanged. That night, after the cameras left and the crowd thinned to a handful of loyal allies, I slipped into a downtown bar, where the amber glow of hanging lights felt like refuge. Seated at a corner table, I cradled a single glass of whiskey and watched the golden spiral of the liquid reflect my own swirl of doubts. Jonah had sent word that a trusted former family attorney was ready to come forward with testimony, but only if I agreed to pursue criminal referrals rather than just civil suits. That was the knife's edge, the difference between forcing real accountability and merely draining their bank accounts. I thought of Grandma's tearful voicemail begging me to remember who I am, and of Emma's fierce loyalty carved into her every text. Could I drag my grandmother's legacy through the mud if it meant stopping a multi-generational crime ring? Every moral compass in my head pointed a different direction, leaving me stranded in ethical quicksand. I set down my glass, leaving the whiskey untouched, and stepped outside into the roar of passing cars and the cry of a late owl. The night air seemed to pulse with possibility and peril. I raised my head toward the neon sign of the bar, a phoenix rising from ash, and felt the promise of rebirth collide with the fear of irrevocable consequences. My phone buzzed Sarah's name on the screen. I answered with a steady voice and said, "Let's go all in." And as the words left my lips, I realized I'd just sealed the deal for better or worse. A week later, I found myself driving out to the old family estate on the outskirts of town, the place where I'd spent every summer until I was 18. The gravel road was pocked and overgrown, like every memory of my childhood had been left to rust. I parked under the ancient oak where Dad used to carve our initials, its gnarled branches sagging under the weight of years. Clutching a copy of the estate's floor plan, I slipped through an overgrown side gate and moved toward the library window I'd once broken with a stray baseball. The risk was electric. If I got caught trespassing, I'd give my parents another legal weapon. But I needed the originals, the signed documents, the ledgers hidden in a safe behind the grandfather clock records, too damning to be sent digitally. My heart pounded as I raised a loose window pane and slid inside. Dust motes hung in golden streams around me while the scent of old leather-bound volumes drifted like a sacred incense. I crept to the clock, pried open the hidden panel, and opened the door to a small steel safe. My hands shook as I dialed the combination I'd extracted from an offhand comment by Wayne at Thanksgiving that first year, a piece of idle boasting I'd filed away. The lock clicked. Inside lay a weathered envelope sealed with my grandmother's crest, and beneath it, thick stacks of signed so-called charitable contribution checks made out to shell foundations in Caribbean tax havens. My breath caught. This evidence would not only confirm the conspiracy, but link it directly to the philanthropic facade they'd paraded for decades. I tucked the envelope into my backpack, heart pounding like a hammer, and slipped out into the gathering dusk, knowing that once I went public with this, the battlefield would expand far beyond courtroom walls. That evening, I convened an emergency meeting with Sarah, Jonah, and Emma in my living room, the soft glow of my Phoenix mural casting dancing shadows on the walls. We laid out the new evidence matching check numbers to bank transfers correspondence to delivery receipts. The truth shimmered like a blade's edge. It was sharp, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Emma's eyes welled as she saw Grandma's handwriting on those checks, proof that the woman who taught me kindness was also ceding to corruption. Sarah's voice was quiet but steel-edged. We file this tomorrow. We'll move for a preliminary injunction to seize those charity funds pending criminal investigation. It's a long shot, but it's the most powerful leverage we have. My pulse thundered, and I realized the magnitude of what I was asking my sister to do betray our own grandmother's memory. Emma closed her eyes, then nodded, her chin lifting. "I'm in," she whispered. Jonah laid a hand on my shoulder. "This could collapse their entire operation, or it could blow back on you. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I looked around at these two people who'd become my pillars, my legal crusader and my unflinching sister. I felt the inner steel I'd honed through every slight and every lawsuit, and I whispered, "I've already lived in their fallout for years. Let them bask in their own ashes if that's what it takes." The room grew still, the moment pregnant with possibility and terror. Then Sarah opened her laptop and said, "This is war." And as her fingers flew over the keys, drafting the next motion, I felt the chamber of my heart tighten and then expand with clarity. Whatever happened next, I would face it head-on, ready to rise from the flames once more. I woke the morning after our final motion, went in to find my phone flooded with headlines: Harper scandal deepens family dynasty, in peril whistleblower or betrayer. My chest tightened at the blur of praise and condemnation. I tied my sneakers for a jog, pounding pavement, as dawn bled into the sky, the rhythmic slap of my soles against concrete grounding me. With each step, I felt the phoenix in my chest ignite, fueling my resolve. I had crossed a line and I couldn't turn back. Yet somewhere between mile 2 and 3, doubt crept in. What if I'd burned every bridge, even the good ones? I paused at a street lamp, breath ragged, and stared at my reflection in its glass, a man shaped by his own choices, every scar a story. I clenched my fists against the cold and whispered, "This is the only way." Then I ran on the city, waking around me, uncertain if the world would still have a place for the man I was becoming. The courthouse felt cavernous on the day of the final hearing. Reporters packed the hall, their cameras swiveling like vultures hunting for a last-minute quote. My lawyer, Sarah, slipped me a reassuring nod as I took the stand. Across the room sat my parents, faces drawn tight. Mom's mascara ran in dark rivulets, Dad's jaw clenched like steel. As I recounted the evidence, the safes, hidden ledgers, the emails linking Grandma's name to shell foundations, the months of coerced phone plan payments, I watched their expressions shift from arrogance to panic. My words were calm, measured, but each one felt like a hammer strike. When I finished, I met Mom's eyes. For the first time, I saw something flicker there beyond anger and shame. Something like regret. Then the judge cleared his throat and I braced myself. The ruling would decide not only their fate, but what place, if any, I'd hold in the shattered remains of our family. The judge's decision came down hard, Grant. Freezing orders on all disputed assets, refer the matter for criminal investigation, and appoint an independent trustee over the family business. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My parents' attorney protested, but it was too late. As the gavel fell, I felt a surreal calm wash over me, like emerging from a storm-battered sea onto solid ground. Yet even in triumph, I sensed a hollow ache. The business I'd grown up admiring was now under federal scrutiny, and the pillars of my childhood had cracked beyond repair. Walking out, I saw Chloe waiting in the lobby, tears tracking down her cheeks. She wrapped me in a fierce hug, murmuring, "I'm so proud, but also I miss them." I held her tighter, torn between relief and mourning, uncertain how to reconcile the cost of justice with the loss of innocence. That evening, Grandma called. Her voice was a frail whisper, trembling like dry leaves in a dying wind. She begged forgiveness for her role, for the secrets she'd practiced beneath polite church suppers, for letting greed outshine her better angels. I listened, heart-torn between the fierce lawyer who'd pushed this case and the grandson who still remembered her lullabies. When I finally spoke, I said, "I forgive you, but not because it erases what happened. Because I don't want to carry that weight anymore." She thanked me, sobbing, and in that moment I felt a crack open in my own heart, letting in something like peace. Yet that peace was fragile, balanced on the edge of a knife. Could I rebuild a relationship with the woman who'd signed away our shared trust, or would our bond forever be the landscape of a courtroom battlefield? In the days that followed, the halls of our family estate fell silent. Wayne resigned from the board, Aurora and Emma consolidated their shares to fund a new social enterprise, and Chloe took over a local nonprofit Grandma had founded years ago. Each step felt like a miniature phoenix rising destruction, giving birth to reinvention. I sold my shares in the family business, using the proceeds to launch a fund for whistleblowers exposing corporate corruption. It wasn't the empire Dad built, but it was honest. Late one afternoon, Emma and I stood beneath the ancient oak, its bark mottled and worn, and she slipped me a small wooden box. Inside lay a single silver feather, etched with a tiny phoenix. "For your next fire," she said with a half smile. I ran my thumb along its curve and felt a swell of hope. Still, I wondered if the symbol would ever feel the same. Could I carry the phoenix, not as a token of vengeance, but as a beacon of transformation? Months later, I stood alone in the converted warehouse space I'd leased as my new office. Exposed brick walls bore the mural of a phoenix ascending flames rendered in molten copper paint. As sunlight slanted through tall windows, dust motes danced like sparks in the air. I flipped through a stack of applications to my whistleblower fund, anonymous stories of injustice, each one a plea for a second chance. My heart swelled with purpose. This was the real rebirth I'd been seeking, a chance to turn ashes into fuel for change. And as I pinned another application to the bulletin board, a banker exposing fraud at a multinational, a factory worker revealing environmental abuse, I realized that my fight with my family had been only the prologue. The world was full of hidden flames waiting to be fanned into light. I ran my fingers over the mural's phoenix wing and whispered, "Let's see how brightly we can burn." In that moment, the city outside pulsed with possibility, and I knew the next chapter was just beginning. An open sky stretching before me, a light with promise and peril, and I was ready to soar. Story 2, I'm Alex Chen, 31, and last Tuesday night, I got a message that blew my world apart. It was from Sabrina, my fiancée of 3 years, and it wasn't words, it was a video. In it, she was on a little cruiser in Santorini wearing my anniversary dress. She was kissing some handsome Italian guy I'd never met. He had dark hair, a tailored blazer, and a smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. I watched it twice. Then I sat on my couch in disbelief, clutching the emerald ring I'd inherited from my grandmother. My mind went back 6 months. That was when I proposed. I'd scraped together most of my savings to buy a custom ring, a deep green emerald set in rose gold just like Grandma's. Zoe Carrington, our wedding planner, and an old college friend had warned me it was risky, but Sabrina always said she hated boring diamonds. I thought I'd nailed it. I remember how her eyes lit up that night like the first line of code finally compiling. We met at a midnight hackathon. I was leading the back-end team for Ridgeway Tech. She was head of front-end at Pixelwave. Our organizers merged us halfway through because they thought our projects fit. I still laugh remembering how Mark Caldwell, my roommate and teammate, got roped into our endless debates about database schemas versus CSS frameworks. By hour 36, we were all delirious and somehow ended up celebrating our MVP award in the server room with a bottle of warm soda and a kiss I didn't even see coming. Fast forward to last month, Sabrina flew off to Rome and Mykonos for a girls' reconnection trip with her college friends Lana, Mia, and Sophia. I really wanted to go. My deadline at Ridgeway was brutal, though. Priya Kapoor, my travel agent friend, offered to rebook my tickets on a moment's notice, but I told her no. I'd been looking forward to a quiet weekend with them once the wedding invites went out. Instead, I stayed home grinding through Python scripts while Sabrina packed that emerald green silk dress I'd bought her. I remember how I imagined her smiling in narrow alleys, twirling under fairy lights, taking endless selfies for Instagram. I even texted her a photo of me wearing the tuxedo I'd ordered for our engagement shoot. "Save me some gelato? Yeah," she replied with a string of heart emojis and sent me a snap of her boarding pass. Everything looked perfect. At least that's what I thought. Then came the video. I was debugging at my desk when my phone buzzed. The notification said video message from Sab. I braced myself for shaky footage of her showing off the Trevi fountain at 2 a.m. Maybe tipsy, maybe funny. Instead, it was her. In my dress. Wrapping her arms around this guy with a golden tan and a name tag that read Capri Charters. They were pressing close under the moonlight, my green dress catching every glint of the yacht's floodlights. She smiled at the camera and mouthed, "Meet Matteo." He treats me right. My chest tightened. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. And then just as I was trying to process, my phone dinged again. A text from her. "Found someone who actually values me. He owns 3 companies and a yacht. Enjoy your cramped apartment and your code. Been fun. Rings on your table. Scrap it for cash." I stared at it. 3 years. 3 years of trust late-night talks about APIs and architecture thinking we were building something real. And she ends it with a video of her betrayal in a single text. I felt a rage boil up, but oddly I stayed calm. I didn't text back, I didn't call, I just sat there breathing deeply. That quiet moment of clarity came when I thought of the last few months. How she'd guarded her phone like it was nuclear. How she'd stayed late at front-end meetups for networking, then come home smelling like expensive soap. How she'd complained about our tiny one-bedroom in Eastwood, my beautiful apartment that I'd spent weekends fixing up. I remembered seeing her on Instagram tagging perfect cafe shots with work trip, always glossing over where she really was. Then I recalled my airline login. I'd bought her return ticket on my corporate status account. It was time. I logged into the airline portal. It took 3 clicks to cancel her flight home. No alerts, no calls, just a silent void where her booking had been. Next, I went to our joint bank account online. There it was, small withdrawals over the past 6 months, $200 here, $300 there, enough to hint she'd been siphoning money off for this trip. And the joint credit card maxed out on luxury linens, who knows what, and that emerald green dress she wore in the video. I grabbed my phone again and called Palazzo Mare, the boutique hotel in Santorini where she'd booked her stay. The manager, Luigi, answered with a friendly buonasera. I told him there'd been an issue with the card on file and that he'd need a new authorization tomorrow or she'd have to check out. He sympathized, shook his head, and agreed. No muss, no fuss. By then it was 2 a.m. I hadn't slept. I sank onto my couch, looking at the empty dress hanging in my closet and the ring sitting on the console. My phone buzzed 10 times, missed calls, angry voicemails, panicked texts from Sabrina begging for help. She said the manager was threatening police, that she'd sold her Rolex to cover one more night, that she was stranded and scared and alone. Each message chipped away at my anger until I realized just how clear I could think when I wasn't blinded by betrayal. I took screenshots of everything, the video, her final text, her cries for money. I emailed them to myself on a burner account and backed them up in the cloud. Then I messaged Mark Pack-a-Bag. I need advice. And ice cream. He replied within seconds. On my way. Bring the whiskey. His loyalty was immediate. That belt and suspender support helped me feel human again. The ring stayed where it was on my desk, gleaming with promise and pain. The dress still hung in the closet, and me, I was sitting in the quiet aftermath of a perfect storm. I'd cut her off at the source flight hotel funds, but that was only step 1. I knew there was more to uncover. Call logs, DMs, hidden accounts. Sabrina had been planning this for months, and now so was I. I poured a glass of whiskey, put on some music, and set my sights on part 2 of this saga. Because you don't just get a breakup like this and walk away. You strategize, you document, you build an arsenal of evidence. And most important, you reclaim your peace. This was after midnight. The worst was over, the quiet before the storm. And I, Alex Chen, was just getting started. Mark showed up at 3 a.m. with a bottle of whiskey and a fatigued grin. I'd texted him an hour before need backup for an emergent harassment case, and here he was settling onto my couch beside the scattered scraps of our evidence. I laid out the flight cancellation screenshots, the bank statements showing her quiet withdrawals, and that video of Sabrina in my emerald green dress on the cruiser. Then I told him about the secret phone I'd discovered in her yoga bag and how I'd breached its cloud backup. It felt ethically gray, but after betrayal, you justify anything to find the truth. In those folders were months of DMs between her and Matteo, plotting dates and fantasizing about a better life. Each message calling me a loving code monkey who didn't understand real ambition stung like acid, but it also ignited a fire in me. I remembered Dad's words in our cramped study code is binary. Life isn't. Learn the logic so you can manage chaos. So I pored over photo timestamps, spotted the same chipped coffee mug in her Santorini selfies that sits in our kitchen, and collected every breadcrumb she thought she'd hidden. Every symbol, my grandmother's emerald, the silk dress, that gelato cone had been weaponized against me, but they backfired spectacularly. In that dim room, I felt fury turn to focus. I wasn't a victim waiting for justice. I was a strategist crafting my counterstrike. But that hack alone wasn't enough to expose her final secret, and I knew the next move would have to be bolder. In the gray light of dawn, I launched Phase 2, turning her world upside down. I used the MAC address from that secret phone to triangulate its last known hotspot, her friend's villa 2 miles from the marina, and tapped into an online community that specializes in digital footprinting. Within hours, I'd traced Matteo's charter company registration number to Capri Charters, a half-legit, half-hustle family outfit. Posing as a travel writer, I called Profiling Luxury Yacht Experiences Insider Scoop on Captain Mateo. The reply came bluntly, "He's here, but don't expect yachts or investors, just selfie ops for tourists." That cut deep. While Sabrina pitched him as a modern Casanova with 3 companies, he was a carnival barker selling illusions. I felt a pang of pity both for her gullibility and the emptiness of a life built on glittering lies. Ambition without integrity is like code without comments, unreadable and dangerous. I grabbed screenshots of our exchange and the scraped company data, then forwarded everything to Land's Hotel back in Eastwood, flagging his shady credentials to their legal team. They thanked me for identifying a potential fraudster and promised to watch out for chargebacks. As I closed my laptop, I realized Sabrina hadn't just chased a man, she'd chased an idea sold by influencer culture, a promise that luxury equals worth. That twisted realization closed the first act of my counterattack and opened another. By evening, whispers of our drama trailed me into a coffee shop. "Isn't that the guy whose fiancé ran off to Greece?" I felt exposed, but I had more to do. I called Sabrina's father, Gregory, under the guise of a concerned fiancé. His voice trembled when I described her video and my discoveries. I heard muffled sobs in the background. He admitted they'd always admired my stability, but worried Sabrina saw me as too safe, too predictable. My heart sank. Predictability had become a crime. Between hushed apologies, he promised they'd handle her. I agreed, though I knew it meant they'd bail her out. Symbolically, my grandmother's ring felt like a millstone around my neck. I climbed to the rooftop, Eastwood's neon skyline flickering like unfinished code, random, beautiful, alive. I slipped the ring off, turning it in my palm until the facets caught a stray streetlight. Could an heirloom carry the weight of disillusionment? I didn't wait for an answer. I laid it on the ledge, a silent monument to a love that fractured. The wind tugged at my jacket as I descended the fire escape, and when I reached the ground, the ring was gone, snatched by night's breeze or something darker. I wasn't prepared for that twist, and I didn't know who or what had taken it. Morning came with an empty finger's worth of velvet lining where that ring had rested. I scanned the CCTV footage from the fire escape camera. A shadow flickered past, tall and unhurried, resembling someone in Sabrina's coat. My blood ran cold. Had she come back, or was someone else reclaiming my family's heirloom? I reached out to Priya, a cyber forensic analyst, with one message: run pattern detection on security cams within 2 blocks. Her reply arrived with a still frame of a hooded figure descending the fire escape in slow motion. It confirmed my suspicion. Someone was playing their own game with my ruins. Then an email popped in from the law firm. Representing Sabrina, they demanded her ring's return at once or threatened suit for emotional distress. Irony struck. She lost my ring and now she wanted it back. I shot off a curt reply, "Come get it," attaching the screenshot of her Santorini text. A calm settled over me that surprised me. Minutes later, I tore open another envelope from the courthouse, a preliminary injunction alleging I'd unlawfully evicted her and destroyed her property. The language was clinical, but the threat was real. A public trial could bury me in fees and publicity. I called my lawyer friend Ella, but her voicemail said she'd be in court all day. I thought of the ring, the dress, the plane ticket, each a casualty of this war. Dad's voice echoed again, "Never surrender the narrative." With trembling fingers, I tapped out a text, "Meet me at my place. Bring backup." I stared at the screen, heart hammering because I realized I'd crossed a line, and I didn't know if I could face the fallout. Ella's message arrived at 10 p.m., her usual calm tone cutting through my mounting anxiety. "I've got your back," she said. Just 4 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of friendship. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a breath. My lawyer wasn't just some back-office advisor. She was the kind of person who wouldn't flinch when the stakes got real. I forwarded her the injunction, my phone buzzing as I refocused on the mess Sabrina had left behind. But as I sank back into my chair trying to process everything, it hit me this wasn't just a breakup anymore. It wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was a reckoning. Sabrina's betrayal wasn't just about her stepping out on me, it was about everything I'd invested into this relationship. The love, the sacrifices, the quiet hours of code that I thought we were both contributing to. All of that had been consumed by her hunger for more, for status, for things that were supposed to be signs of success, but only revealed her emptiness. Her desire for a life made of expensive handbags and perfect Instagram photos had clouded her perception of what truly mattered. Partnership, mutual respect, trust. She was playing by a different set of rules, one that prioritized wealth and luxury over integrity and loyalty. She had never once questioned that what she was doing was wrong. I I think she believed she could always just walk away from the damage without facing the consequences. The next morning, I called in sick to work. There was too much at stake, too much unraveling. I spent the entire day sitting in front of my laptop flicking through Sabrina's past, carefully piecing together the puzzle she'd tried so hard to keep hidden. I found more than just the DMs and hotel receipts. There were online purchases, luxury items tagged with specific notes, like for the trip with Matteo, and a meticulously curated list of destinations in Europe she'd planned to visit on her own without me. I hadn't realized just how much she'd planned this whole thing, how she'd created a parallel life without me in it. The dress, the ring, the trips, they were all symbols of the life she'd discarded, each item reflecting her desire to be seen in a different light. But what I began to see in the process was that I wasn't just the one left behind. The entire system she'd built was a house of cards, fragile, self-serving, and empty. In the end, I wasn't the only one losing. She had sacrificed everything, love, trust, and her sense of identity for an illusion of success. And there, in the silent hours of the afternoon, it struck me I was already free. I no longer needed to prove my worth to her or anyone else. I didn't need her validation. The weight of that realization was both liberating and terrifying. My world had shifted without me realizing it, and now I stood on the precipice looking at everything that was left. It felt like staring at an open window in the middle of a storm, unsure whether to close it or step through. Ella arrived by evening with a stack of legal papers in hand, and we began strategizing. The quiet tension of the night had already seeped into my bones. We were setting the groundwork for the battle ahead, but all I could think about was what Sabrina's face would look like when everything came crashing down. Would she try to twist the story to her advantage? Would she play the victim, making me out to be the villain in front of everyone we knew? The fear that hung over me was less about the legal fight and more about how everyone would perceive this. Sabrina was a master at manipulation, but I wasn't a fool anymore. I had the receipts. I had the proof. It was all a game of patience now, waiting for her next move. The phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mom. I've spoken to Bob. He's still upset with you for sending the video. My mom and Bob had always gotten along, but I could sense the weight in her words. Bob, Sabrina's father, had been a good man, a man of integrity, but his loyalty was blinding him to the truth of his daughter's actions. I didn't respond right away, but I knew I had to prepare myself for whatever conversation awaited me. The tricky part was going to be handling Diane, Sabrina's mother. She had always been a thorn in my side, subtly critical, always pushing for more. The words she'd said about my lack of ambition had stung, but now they felt almost like a prelude to the game Sabrina was playing. Her parents were the ones who had enabled her behavior, perhaps unwittingly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a relationship falling apart. It was about the influence of a certain worldview that values material success over all else. Sabrina's family had raised her to chase status above all things, to see people not for who they were, but for what they could offer. To them, love was a transactional thing, just another line in a ledger. It was the world she was raised in, the world of appearances, of showing off. But I couldn't fight against the weight of her family's expectations alone. I had to think beyond the legal drama and confront the real issue. Sabrina had been raised to believe that love wasn't enough. And that was a battle I wasn't sure I was ready to fight. A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. Mark entered holding a bottle of wine. "I thought we could use a little distraction," he said, flashing a rare grin. We both knew the game wasn't over yet, but for tonight, we'd share this small victory of silence. I poured a glass and stared at the streetlights from the window, my mind racing with every possible scenario. How long would she play the "I'm the victim" card? Would she show up at my door again, pleading for forgiveness, or would she just slink back into her shallow world, never facing what she'd done? The truth is, I was no longer afraid of her. What I feared now was the quiet aftermath, the emptiness of everything we'd shared, the looming question of whether I could ever trust again, not just in love, but in the idea of love. Could I build something real from this wreckage? Was there even room in my heart for that anymore? The night slipped by the weight of all that remained pressing on me. Tomorrow I would face Sabrina again. But this time it wouldn't be about saving her or salvaging what we had. This time it was about standing up for what was mine and walking away from everything that had tried to tear me down. The game had just begun. The day Sabrina came back to Eastwood felt like the calm before a storm, but with an eerie stillness hanging over everything. I'd made sure to mentally prepare myself. No more second guessing, no more guilt. I'd done nothing wrong. This was her doing, not mine. Yet when I stood in front of the mirror that morning, I couldn't shake the sense that something had changed inside me. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had settled in my bones over the last few days, or maybe it was just the realization that I was for the first time no longer the person I thought I was. She had peeled away layers of my identity, forcing me to confront everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. The life I thought I had been building now felt like it had been constructed on sand, temporary and fragile, ready to collapse at the first sign of a storm. I stood in my apartment staring at the dress she'd left behind, folded neatly in the back of the closet like a relic of a life that no longer existed. The deep green of the silk felt like a wound now, not the symbol of affection it once was. It reminded me of how easily she'd discarded everything we shared, as though it were disposable. As though I were disposable. That thought haunted me, but I knew better than to let it control me. I'd given Sabrina my best, and she'd thrown it all away. I wasn't about to chase her through the wreckage. The day of reckoning was near, and I was ready. The knock on my door that afternoon wasn't unexpected. I could feel it in the air as the day dragged on, heavy, thick with anticipation. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Sabrina's footsteps had always sounded different from anyone else's, a slight tap of desperation hidden beneath the confident stride. I took a deep breath, walking toward the door, slowly, as if I could prolong the inevitable confrontation. I opened it, and there she was. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale from what I guessed had been days of crying, or some other calculated emotional ploy. She stood there in silence for a moment, probably assessing whether I'd show any signs of weakness. "I came to get my things," she said, her voice flat, almost rehearsed, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't the confident woman she'd once been, at least not the way she had once sold herself to me. This was the woman who had broken something precious, and now had to face the consequences of her actions. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Not anymore. I stepped aside and let her in, but I didn't say a word. She moved like she had a script running in her head, opening drawers, glancing around for what was hers, but I couldn't help but notice how everything had changed. The place had once been our home, quiet, lived in, comfortable, but now it felt like a shell. Something hollowed out, waiting to be abandoned. She gathered her things, but she didn't touch anything of value, the things that we'd invested in together. The new kitchen gadgets, the expensive speakers we'd picked out for the living room, they were all still here untouched. She took only the bare essentials, her clothes, her toiletries. A perfect metaphor for how little she had truly cared about what we'd built. As she moved toward the door, she paused. Her fingers brushed the edge of the countertop, and she took a deep breath. I could see her fighting to find the words, but there was nothing left to say. The damage had already been done. But still she tried. "You know you were never the one I wanted to be with," she muttered, almost as though speaking to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. I could have snapped, could have raged at her, but instead I stayed silent, watching her taking in every word. She thought she was the one who had power here, the one who was in control, but she couldn't even see how weak she had become. It wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about understanding the game she had been playing all along and realizing I was no longer part of it. "You were just comfortable," she continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. "I wanted more. I want more, Alex. I don't want this life of mediocrity, of compromise. I don't want to be stuck here with you." And in that moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for the woman standing before me, but for the world she had chosen to live in, a world where success and material wealth were everything. A world that told her love was nothing more than a stepping stone on the way to a bigger, better version of herself. I had tried to fit into that world once, but I realized now that I wasn't the one who had been deluded. She was. She looked at me then, her gaze sharp, calculating, and I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Fear, maybe? The fear that comes when someone realizes they've made a mistake so large they can never undo it. But she didn't apologize. She never did. Instead, she turned and walked out as if the weight of our past had already been shed like a heavy coat. I closed the door behind her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the pressure release. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't anything but free. The walls that had once felt like a prison now stood as quiet sentinels guarding nothing but memories. She had wanted more, but in the end, she had lost everything. She had chased a dream of luxury and success, thinking that it could replace the quiet, honest things we had shared. But none of that was real. Not really. As the hours passed, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the empty space where her things had been. The emptiness wasn't so bad anymore. It was just a reminder of how far I'd come, how much I'd grown. I'd been forced to shed the parts of me that had been afraid to stand up for myself to speak my truth. But now all that was left was clarity. I could see things for what they were, not for what I had hoped they would be. And then just as I thought I could put this chapter behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Bob. I know this has been hard on everyone, but I need you to know. Diane and I, we've talked. We understand now. We've been blind to what's really been happening with Sabrina. I'm sorry, Alex. I stared at the screen, the words slowly sinking in. Bob, the man I had respected for so long, now saw the truth. It wasn't about forgiving Sabrina or about reconciling with her. It was about understanding that I had never been the problem. I had been the one willing to fight for something real while she had been playing a game with no rules. But as I read the message again, something strange hit me. I didn't need their apology. This was my victory, my journey. And no one, not even Sabrina or her parents, could take that from me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming myself, understanding that I was worth more than the lies she had told herself. And that was worth more than any apology. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Sabrina. But this time I didn't need to read it. I had already moved on. The life she had tried to build, the illusion of grandeur. It was gone, a mirage fading under the harsh light of truth. I had learned that I didn't need her or anyone to define my worth. I was enough. And with that, I turned off my phone, settled back into the silence of my apartment, and finally allowed myself to breathe.